Warnba's reviews.
Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is finally here, and it is available on PC, Xbox One, and PlayStation 4. This game is also an Xbox Play Anywhere title, so if you buy this game on Xbox One, you will get a free copy for Windows 10, being able to take your saved games and achievements with you. If PlayStation 4 is more your console though, you are certainly not left out. On PlayStation 4, PlayStation VR is fully supported, so you can play the entirety of this game in virtual reality. Does this game live up to the Resident Evil name? Do you need to have played the other Resident Evil games to understand what is going on? Is Resident Evil scary again? Let's get right into it. The narrative follows Ethan Winters in his search for his wife Mia Winters, who is believed to have been dead for 3 years. At the beginning of the game, Ethan gets a video from Mia telling him to stay away and that she is sorry. Ethan, needing to see his wife again, sets out for Dulvey, Louisiana to search for her. What is uncovered is a legitimately gripping story that had me hooked from start to finish. A lot of this story is told through documents scattered throughout the Baker estate. This has come to be expected from those of us who have been with the series from the beginning. There are no documents that stand out to me quite as much as the itchy tasty document from Resident Evil 1, but there were some documents, especially towards the end, that sent legitimate shivers down my spine. Also, there are nods throughout the game to old Resident Evils. For example, during a section of the game, Lucas Baker types on a keypad and it actually makes the sounds that the menu made from Resident Evil Code Veronica. To most who play this game, the noises are unintrusive and benign, but for die-hard Resident Evil fans like myself, this is reassurance that our voices have been heard and that the current team at Capcom understands that the classic Resident Evil games are still unbelievably important to so many of us. So the game has throwbacks to classic Resident Evils, but that in no way means that this game is solely for those of us who have beaten every other Resident Evil. Resident Evil 7 feels very much like a series reboot. Sure, it technically takes place after the events of Resident Evil 6, but none of those events of past games are ever spoken about, hardly any characters are even mentioned, and none of my knowledge from past games helped me further understand the events of this game. This game is largely standalone, and I think that's a very good thing. This story focuses on a much more intimate story instead of the messy, overcomplicated, and convoluted ways that Resident Evil 6 told its story. Resident Evil has been getting in its own way in terms of storytelling for the past few games. This story told here was a breath of fresh air. The RE engine is gorgeous. The team at Capcom clearly knows a thing or two about optimizing to both look great and run great. The game has a much more photorealistic look to it now, which serves the atmosphere of the game well, and the environments look oppressive, deteriorated, and uninviting. The shadows are really impressive. Hair reacts in a realistic way, high dynamic range is fully supported, granted you have the equipment to utilize it, and it appears that Capcom went into painstaking detail over every little thing in the environment to make this world feel all the more real. No matter your platform, PC, Xbox One, PlayStation 4, your game will look great. The PC certainly has the edge in terms of graphics, but you will only really notice the difference with side-by-side comparisons. First things first, this is a Resident Evil game, absolutely. One of my first reactions to the game when it was first announced was shock over the fact that this game is now first person. I felt that the creators of Resident Evil were once again out of touch with what Resident Evil fans like myself wanted, and were trying to copy other successful games rather than sticking to what made Resident Evil so great in the first place. Starting with 4, the success of action games clearly had a direct impact on the direction Resident Evil took, and even though 4 and 5 are great games in their own right, they do not feel as special in my opinion as the first 3, Code Veronica or Outbreak. When you look at Resident Evil 7, it is easy to spot inspirations modern horror games have had on the formula, but with that being said, this feels like a classic Resident Evil experience, just with modern day conventions. The game has 3 difficulties. Easy and normal are available for you at your first playthrough, and Madhouse difficulty unlocks after you beat the game at least once. My playthrough was normal, and I can say in my experience that ammo was limited, at least for the majority of the game. I never felt overpowered, and each and every time I reached a save room and heard that sweet, sweet music, I felt a huge sense of relief. For certain stretches of the game, you will be up against different members of the Baker family. Each member has a unique style to their madness. Jack will scare you with his brute force, for instance, while Marguerite will make you uneasy by the bugs at her disposal. My one major gripe with this game is that I did feel that these sections could sometimes go on for a little long. And for me, the stealth elements of these sections seem at odds with why it is that I play Resident Evil in the first place. With that being said, some of these encounters were absolutely terrifying, and I definitely had a constant fear of dread, not wanting to be seen by these characters. If you're caught though, worry not. It is not an immediate death sentence. You can try running away, and if you find a safe room, you can hide out in there for a while. Aside from the Baker family, the only other enemies in the game are called the Molded, and they come in a few different variations, but generally they feel similar. I found these enemies to be challenging, but unlike the Bakers who can open doors or even bust through walls or climb in the ceiling, these enemies can be thwarted by simply closing the door on them. They're not zombies, but they did feel like a classic type of Resident Evil enemy in the sense that there are a lot of them, and sometimes they will corner you and have you in a bad spot, but overall they can be easily outsmarted. I found myself running past a good amount of these enemies, getting them to follow me in a room, running back out and closing the door on them. Shooting off specific limbs or going for that headshot kill are also extremely satisfying ways of playing. Some people have expressed that the lack of enemy variety does harm to the game overall, but I personally do not feel this way. I feel that the game does an excellent job of explaining why these enemies are there, where they came from, and why they have the specific look. There are slight variations in how some of these Molded will fight, and I do feel like that gives enough diversity in the way I chose to react depending on which variation I encountered. The puzzles in Resident Evil 7 strike a respectable balance between uncomfortable tension, challenge, and classic Resident Evil charm. The beginning puzzles are definitely easier, but the challenge does ramp up as the game continues on. There's one puzzle in particular that I will not spoil here, but I will say that the Happy Birthday puzzle had me genuinely stumped for a good 10 minutes, and when I finally figured out what to do and I got that eureka moment, I couldn't help but smile like a huge dork before going back to being terrified again. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is a great game and worthy of any survival horror fan's time. This game goes back to what made Resident Evil so great in the first place while simultaneously acknowledging that some elements did need to be updated. I give Resident Evil 7 Biohazard 4.5 Jill sandwiches out of 5.